Welcome back to the Your Everyday Strength podcast. My name is Josh Sternberg, and if you're just joining us here for the first time today, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. If you are returning, also, thank you very much for being here. Now, today's episode is a solo episode. Again, as I'm still trying to lock in a bunch of guests, the irony is I have about 4 different guests who I'm just trying to coordinate scheduling with at the moment. But alas, for the sake of consistency, I wanted to ensure that I actually still put out an episode every single week, because that is the commitment I made to myself, is I need to release an episode weekly. But I don't always have something profound and prolific to say every single week that's going to be impactful for others. And I don't necessarily want to just be adding to the noise of the world as it is at the moment, because I feel like so many people genuinely just yap for the sake of actually fucking talking for this and hearing their own voice. And I've never necessarily wanted to be somebody that does that. Now, you could probably argue against that given the challenge that I've been doing at the moment on social media, where I'm quite literally just uploading a video of me talking to the camera for 60 seconds every single day. That is basically noise. And in some aspects, you could probably be correct. But I guess at the end of the day, that still has an intended purpose behind it. It's not just me literally just spitting dribble for the sake of spitting dribble. It actually has an intended purpose behind it, with just trying to become a little bit more articulate in the way in which I talk, a little bit more succinct, concise with my messaging, things like that as well. And just practice. At the end of the day, I've seen a huge increase in my ability to actually talk to the camera, which oddly enough, you'd think I'd be a lot better at it given how long I've been running this podcast for now. But hey, here we are. So what I figured I would do, and this is something that I'm going to want to try and keep as consistent as I can, is I want to have these like 15, 20-minute episodes that are very short, succinct episodes, but they have just a little bit of a key message in each of them, or some form of helpful task. Not task, that's the wrong word. They're just helpful to some degree. Today's episode, if you've read the title, is quite literally the best self-help books you're not reading, and why you should be. Because it's no surprise that I have read quite a lot of books in my time. I have read just about every self-help book you can think of. I've either read them, I've listened to them on audio, like Audible or stuff like that, or whatever. I've read a lot of them. And it was around the middle of last year, I would say, where I just started to realize that a majority of the books were just saying the same thing, but in different wording. And the wording was just the author's interpretation of the actual message that comes behind it. A lot of the key principles and a lot of the foundational things that actually make up a lot of the lessons that are within self-help books are predominantly all derived from philosophy. And philosophy has been around for thousands of years. So I kind of got to the point where I was sick of reading other people's interpretations, and I'm somebody who does think a lot. I reflect a lot, I think a lot, I question a lot. I'm just very inquisitive in nature. And so I was like, well, instead of me just continuing to read other people's interpretations of these books, lessons, etc., why don't I actually go and read from the direct from the source, make my own interpretations up based upon my own lived experience, based upon my own human evolution as a whole, and see what I can come up with. And one of the things that actually really pushed me down towards the path of getting into reading philosophy and things like that was a book, The Fourth Pillar by Harry Moffat. Now, this book for me was probably one of the most influential books that actually got me on the path of reading more philosophy. And I really liked this because anybody who's actually read philosophy, or if you haven't and you've been somewhat interested in it, it's a lot. Like, it's not actually super easy, because we need to remember that a lot of the lessons and things like that have been taken and translated for thousands of years, hundreds of years. So a lot of the lessons that are coming through aren't necessarily coming from people who are within our generation or within our demographic or anything like that. Like, these are lessons that have been around for countless years, and they've been open to interpretation by quite a lot of people. I really liked Harry Moffat's book because he is an ex-SAS soldier who is now currently a corporate psychologist, and he's essentially encapsulated all of those lessons and then added the philosophical aspect of things in Stoicism. And it's essentially, so the title is The Fourth Pillar, Modern Stoicism and the Philosophy of High Performance. And it really started to get the cogs turning in my brain of like, okay, well, he's speaking my language for one. And I know a lot of the people who listen to this podcast will probably relate when I say that sort of stuff, because a lot of you guys also speak the same language as me. We understand each other. And that for me was like probably the best introduction to philosophy I could find, because it was modern enough that a lot of the lessons and interpretations were actually really relevant and easy to read, and you didn't need to think too deeply about any of them. There's a lot of practical takeaways that you could implement straight away, and I really enjoyed that aspect of things. And then it really started to bridge that gap for me about what was possible with actually getting into reading philosophy and where to start and what to do, because when you actually start to look at philosophy, it is very much, there's so many different schools of philosophy and so many different thoughts and theories, and some are counteracting others and they don't all work into each other. So you might sit there and say, well, I've started reading philosophy and all of a sudden one of the books you're reading is about I have just gone completely blank, which is ironic because I finished reading the book 2 days ago. Extensionalism, that's the one I'm thinking of, extensionalism. And then you just have like Stoicism, which is a little bit different again. And then you have what would be technically classified as like Socrates. So Socrates is more seen as one of the founding fathers of Western philosophy. And he taught a lot of the people that are actually then have gone on and become students of others. So he taught Plato taught Aristotle, which that just kind of passes down the line. And a lot of these names are really popular and a lot of these names are really well known. But when you actually look at like the core foundational principles of what they're all speaking, they're somewhat different. Some of them argue against each other and things like that. And I actually really like that because it allows you to get a better perspective. It allows you to actually expand your worldview and your thought process a little bit more. So instead of thinking in one basket and that everything is X, you can also then understand that, well, actually things might be X, but at times they can also be Y, they can be Z, they can be B, they can be all of these different things all at once. And it's just more or less about understanding the foundational principles behind them and then understanding how that actually interacts with your life. So something that's been really cool for me has been not just reading and learning about philosophy and Stoicism and all of that, but actually seeing it integrate into my life. And one of the most profound books I have ever read, and probably one of the most impactful books I've ever read in my life, is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Now, anybody who knows anything about philosophy, Stoicism, any of that will know this as like almost the Bible. This would essentially be looked at as the Bible of philosophy, I would say. I would argue that that is probably one of the most interesting books out of any of them, and it will be the best one and easiest one to actually get started with, because it's not so much a story or a book that you read from start to finish. It is just a whole bunch of quotes and short little messages. It's essentially just the diary of Marcus Aurelius. And despite the fact that it was written in 120, so he was born 121 AD, and was the emperor of Rome. So this book is very, very, very old, and this was essentially just his daily diary entries and things that have been sort of put together from his works over time. It's more along the lines of Stoicism, but it genuinely changed so much of my life, and it came into my life at the perfect time. I picked this book up when I was going through a really hard time after my breakup this year, the end of last year, and it allowed me to actually just sit with my thoughts a lot better, and it allowed me to actually understand my thoughts a lot better. I'm not going to say better than any of the other self-help books I've ever read, because I feel like without having the foundation and the knowledge that I had from some of those, I wouldn't have necessarily been able to understand and implement the lessons that I did learn. But something I did a little bit differently with Meditations that I've never done with another book before is I annotated. And I annotated in the way that I wanted to really sit with and interpret the lessons my own way. So what I essentially did with that was I have this diary journal right here. It looks very fancy. It's very nice. Kiva bought it for me for Christmas. And I essentially read the passages or the quotes or whatever I want to get through for that day. And I start to just write my own thoughts and feelings around them. So that instead of just reading and having all this like random knowledge, I'm actually trying to practically implement the lessons that are being taught within these books and how they actually interact within my world. Another book that really made a pretty massive difference for me, and funnily enough, I first read it, I listened to it as an audiobook when I was driving back from Townsville at Christmas time. And it's called The School of Life, An Emotional Education by Alain de Botton. And he is what I would classify as probably a modern philosopher. So we have like our old school philosophers that everybody knows about. I've already mentioned a couple of them, Socrates, Aristotle, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Sisyphus. Fuck, I can't pronounce his name. There's a lot of weird pronunciations, but he's like a very modern day philosopher. And I think that if people were actually looking to sort of get into reading philosophy, that would be another really recommended gateway, because he essentially takes a lot of the philosophical principles, lessons, etc., makes them a little bit more modernized, and then categorizes them based upon different areas of our lives. So it breaks it down into self, work, relationships, like all of that sort of stuff. And then it kind of allows you to be like, okay, well, what are you actually struggling with at this point in time? Is it relationships? Okay, cool. We'll read these passages here. And this just gives you a little bit more of an understanding about maybe some of the base principles or what you can help yourself with, or lessons that you can take away from it. And now this is my third time reading that through, second reading it, but first, because I obviously listened to the audiobook, but that would probably be like, if I had like a pathway for somebody who was actually interested in getting into this sort of thing, it would be The Fourth Pillar by Harry Moffat. Then it would be The School of Life by Alain de Botton. And then absolutely Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. But you could probably just add meditations at any point and just start to make your way through it, because it's just so impactful and so practically applicable into just about every sort of aspect of your life, which I think is really cool. And my favorite thing with this sort of stuff at the moment, and the reason why I wanted to put this podcast out, is I've shied away a little bit from talking about getting into philosophy a lot more and things like that, because I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why, really. Honestly, it's something that kind of aligns with a lot of the messages I put out and a lot of the things I discuss. But I guess it was one of those things that was almost a little bit of that. I didn't know heaps about it, so I didn't feel right talking about the topic, despite the fact that, like, I feel even just the base level of knowledge that you start to learn from these things actually can be quite helpful to people. And I already talk about a lot of the things and a lot of the lessons that I've taken away from it. And the biggest probably overarching lesson that I've integrated this year is controlling what you can control the controllables. And that is a message that I've continued to ring out this entire year. With everything that has happened this year, all I have come back to is controlling the controllables. What can I control? What is within my control? And that is actually a lot of the lessons that I learned from meditations, because that is a very Stoicism approach to life. The Stoics believed that you essentially can control only so much in your life, and anything that's outside of that shouldn't affect you. Now, that's easier said than done in theory. Trust me. I would love to just be like, okay, cool. Anything that's not within my control, I don't care about, but it's just not the case. And it's something that I'm trying to get better at and trying to improve upon. And there are people who do this really, really well. And there are people who don't. And I was one of those people. I had a tendency to overthink and then over feel like I had more control than I did. And then I would get upset about the things I couldn't necessarily control, such as other people's behavior, external events happening, the weather, all of these sort of different external things to you. We can essentially only control who we are, how we show up, how we interact with the world, and our thoughts and feelings. So not necessarily our feeling, but we can control our thoughts around those feelings. And there's the basic sort of understanding of, like, with Stoicism is nothing can affect you if you don't allow it to. So oftentimes our own brains, our own minds are actually the worst enemy towards us, because they start to overthink things. And I'm sure everybody's been this way before, where you might have to have a tough conversation with someone, be it a partner, a boss, a friend, whatever, and you just start to create like the world's worst situational outcomes from that. And then all of a sudden you have the conversation and you're like, oh, that actually wasn't even that bad. It was way better than I thought it was, because oftentimes we just build it up to be so much worse in our own heads. And I can probably confidently say that my anxiety this year has been the lowest it's ever been, purely from reading and starting to get a little bit more into this sort of stuff, because it's just allowed me to actually sit with and understand that like I can only control so much of my life. If I try and continue to try and hold and control too much, I will get lost and I'll get pulled and I'll get swayed in every which direction. But if I actually just take a step back, look at everything as a theme, this is something I do quite regularly at the moment, is when I'm journaling, I will just brain dump an entire page of every single thing that's in my brain, big, little, whatever. It doesn't matter. If it's in my head at any point in time through that day, through that week, I write it out. And I will fill pages of just whatever's going through my head. And then I'll essentially go through and put it into like can I control this? Yes, no. Okay. If I can control it, okay, what can I do about it? So it's an actionable step. If I can't control it, let it go. And once I've actually done that process, it's funny how freeing it's actually become. And then when I realize what is within my control and the actionable steps are there to actually start to implement essentially and place into my day to day, all of a sudden the anxiety is gone, because now I have a feeling of control and a feeling of understanding about, okay, I can actually control this. I can't control that. So let that go, do what I can for this. And then whatever happens, happens from there. So that's why for me, it was like this stuff has just really started to become integrated into my day-to-day life. And it's funny because a lot of people will look at the philosophy aspect of things and Stoicism and things like that and think it contradicts some of the spirituality side of things and the woo-woo-ness, but it doesn't. I would actually say that despite what people would maybe want to think, philosophy, Stoicism, all of that, and spirituality are actually way closer interconnected than people would want to believe. And that's because at the end of the day, the core foundational principles with both of them are essentially all just about controlling yourself, controlling your emotions, learning to let things go that you can't control, learning to actually implement emotional regulation, learning to actually learn how to control and downregulate your nervous system. Because if we want to stay high vibrational and in a position to be actually able to receive from a spiritual lens, then we need to control our nervous system. And if we want to stay level-headed and in control from a Stoicism philosophy perspective, then we need to learn how to control our nervous system, control our emotions, control all of these aspects. And that is why I believe they actually interconnect way more. And I think that that's a really cool way to look at it for me, especially because I am someone who's very open-minded and I like all of these different things. And sometimes, yes, they actually contradict each other. But at the end of the day, it's about taking certain lessons, and you're not going to implement every single thing you read within these books. As I said, finished a book the other day, What is Existentialism by Simone de Beauvoir. And she's French, I believe. And then the other book was Something Happiness by Epictetus. And they're not necessarily the same. They don't have the same core foundational principles, but there was lessons I could take from What is Existentialism, and there was lessons I could take from Epictetus's book. There's lessons I can take from all of these different books that I can utilize. And from like a, spirituality side of things, and even just understanding ourselves a lot better and sitting with self and understanding self. And from a psychological perspective, we have another really fantastic book, which is Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. And anybody who doesn't know who Carl Jung is, he is essentially the person who probably is the most founding father of understanding the subconscious mind and understanding our dreams, interpreting our dreams, and our understanding of all of this sort of stuff. He was a psychologist who implements scientific research and evidence into the spiritual lens. And this is why I like all of this stuff, because I am somebody who's still very science-minded. I have an exercise science degree. I'm very much a realist in that regards as well. So having these interconnections between everything that I'm actually learning helps my brain to be like, okay, cool, this stuff actually all has its place, its reasoning, its understanding, its lessons, its validation, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term. But Man and His Symbols is a great book. I've only read aspects of it so far. I only got it the other day, to be completely honest. But I've looked at a lot of Carl Jung's work and watched a lot of videos and things like that on him on YouTube. And YouTube is another great place too. If you are actually interested in getting into any of this sort of stuff, but you don't really know where to start, or maybe some of it, and do not feel bad in any way, shape, or form if this is the case. Maybe a little bit of it goes over your head. A lot of it goes over my head sometimes, and I have to actually come back to it once I've thought about it and tried to think further and then break it down a little bit better into a better understanding for myself. But YouTube's a great way to actually start to learn some of these things as well. And with that, it's then expanded my understanding of just a lot of different things. So a couple of other books that I've been reading recently, and this is really funny. I read probably 5 books at any one time because they're a mix of fiction and nonfiction. Some of them I like to read before bed because it helps me to switch off, which is generally my nonfiction. At the moment, I'm still reading Pierce Brown's Red Rising series. I'm on book 5 of 6 at the moment. And then some of the other books I've been reading that are technically classified as nonfiction is Fyodor Dostoevsky. So I've read a couple of his books so far. This is White Nights, which I've started. And I read Man Underground the other day. And again, he's a Russian author. So his books are translated. And the thing we need to understand when it comes to translations is it's not always just as simple as like, okay, what does this word mean? Okay, what is it in English? That's great. English is a very interesting language as a whole. And what a lot of people actually don't understand is Russian, for example, they might have words, but that word actually represents like an entire thing. So a particular word might actually not just represent a word, but it has like this whole background meaning to it. And if you don't perfectly translate that aspect of things, you can sometimes lose the core message and the core feeling behind it. So some of the translations are really hard to read and understand. And The Underground Man for me was like it was a mind blow because it's technically nonfiction. Sorry, it's technically fiction. And it's such a just interesting read. You feel scattered trying to read it because it is a very scattered book, and that's actually what the author was trying to achieve. And the funny thing is it has a lot of psychological basis before psychology was truly explored. So Dostoevsky was around in the 1800s, before really a school of philosophies and stuff like that. Not philosophy, psychology were even established. And so it's very interesting. They're very interesting books, but they're not for everyone, and that's okay. It's one of those things. Some people might be interested in it, some people might not be. And the reason why I wanted to put it out is because it's genuinely something that's taken me with a lot of interest over the last probably 18 months. And it's now something I feel comfortable enough to start talking about a little bit more. It's just interesting. That's all the premise behind it is anybody who's read self-help books, anybody who reads and enjoys self-help stuff, whether that's podcasts, whether that's YouTube, whatever it might be for you that works really well. A lot of the core foundational principles are the things that you're getting taught within those different sort of modalities and media types is stemming from a lot of this work, is coming from Socrates, is coming from Plato, is coming from Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, all of these different people who have been around for hundreds, thousands of years. So if you really are interested in trying to learn and understand yourself better, but then also not only just understanding yourself, understanding others a lot better, because this has actually opened up my worldview of understanding of other people. And I feel that it has allowed me to actually be able to better converse with other people. It has allowed me to have better presence with other people. It's allowed me to have better understanding with other people. And I think that anything that is going to benefit you and the way in which you actually are able to interact with the world is going to benefit the collective as a whole. So I'm not saying you have to get into philosophy. I'm not saying you have to read all these books or anything like that. But if it is something that interests you and it is something that you have thought about or even not thought about, but since hearing this podcast, you're like, wow, this would be really cool to actually get started in, please feel free to send me a message, and I would love to have a chat with you about it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts or recommend some books or things like that, because there's a few other books I've got that would actually probably be pretty helpful if you are interested in that. So that's pretty much it for today. As I said, it's going to be a short episode, 20 to 30 minutes, in and out, one core foundational lesson or just topic to keep the consistency of the podcast moving forward. But as I said, if you do have any questions, queries, comments about anything to do with stuff that I mentioned in today's podcast, please feel free to let me know. Feel free to share it around if you like, comment, subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts if you're on there. Even follow the page on Instagram, the Your Everyday Strength podcast page. It's been really good of late. The growth has been fantastic. I just want to continue to keep that growing. I really love doing this podcast, and I would love to continue it growing forward. So thank you very much for listening today. I will catch you on the next one.